Hi, everyone. Thank you to those who joined early. We'll get started in just a minute. Hi, Chris. Hi, Pete. Glad it's sunny over there. Hi, Andre. All right, I think we can get started. So, good morning or good evening, everyone, wherever you're joining in from today. Thank you for being in our Cyber Intelligence Report webinar and spending the next hour or so with us. I am your webinar host, Crystal, and I'm super excited to kick us off. We have a great session. But before I hand it over to our speaker, there are a few housekeeping notes to cover. So first, the session is recorded and you will receive the recording within 24 hours post-event via email. And if you don't see that email, please feel free to reach out to me at events@criticalstart.com and I'll be happy to assist you. And then next, we will be launching polls throughout the session, so be sure to engage with us. Once you see the pop-up window on your screen, you can go ahead and select your answers. And then for questions, you can use the Q&A function, or you're welcome to send those questions in the chat as well. But it doesn't really end there because today we're also giving away 4 of $25 Amazon gift cards. And in order to enter the raffles, all you have to do is answer the poll questions and ask a question in the chat. So it's that easy. Good luck to everyone, and let's get started. So, Alex, I'm excited to hand it off to you. Please tell the crowd a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Dufault. I'm a cyber threat intelligence analyst here at Critical Start. I've been here since August of 2024. Before I was here at Critical Start, I was an intelligence officer for the Air Force. I specialized in signals intelligence and in cyber, so this world is not foreign for me. So with that out of the way, one thing I do want to note is that this is an overview of Critical Start's H2 report. So for any defensive or mitigation strategies for a lot of these threat actors, or if you just want to dive deeper into a lot of these topics, I do encourage you to follow up with our publication of the H2 report. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. So this is our agenda for today. So we're going to be going over our industry outlook, our threat actors and malware families, our timelines and TTPs, trending cybersecurity concerns, and then we can wrap it up with a Q&A. So for the industry outlook, this was what our core data revealed, that these were the top 5 targeted industries. So we have professional services, banking and finance, manufacturing, retail, and technology and software. To get a little more granular as far as the data is concerned, all these percentages are based off instances per organization. So with that, we have professional services at 17%, banking and finance at 14%, manufacturing at 13%, retail at 9%, and technology and software at 6%. So with all that identified, let's actually dive into the industry. So number one we have was professional services. So cyber attacks on the professional services industry increased by 20.8% in the second half of 2024. This really made it a prime target for threat actors. A lot of the industries that were impacted do include legal firms, funeral homes, fitness centers, consulting firms, and security companies. And what's in common with all these industries is that they have and handles a lot of sensitive client data, where a lot of threat actors could then exploit that using ransomware, dark web sales, as well as identity-based crime. So the high-value nature of these professional services and the data that comes with it do make these industries particularly vulnerable to financial and reputational damage. For common attack tools, we identified real binding EDR, which is an EDR killer. We also identified Lockbit, which is ransomware, as well as Mimikatz for the credential dumping to escalate privileges within those compromised networks. For common initial access TTPs, so spear phishing links and exploitation of external remote services, which would allow attackers to infiltrate organizations before deploying malware and exfiltrating that data. And for the top vulnerabilities within this industry, we identified CVE 2021 40438, which is a critical heap-based buffer overflow vulnerability in the for iOS that can allow remote attackers to execute the arbitrary code. And secondly, we have CVE 2023 27532, which is a high severity flaw in the VM backup and replication cloud connect, where missing authentication can let attackers access and manipulate those backups without credentials. I want to draw your attention to the map on the right of the screen here. This is the geographical locations of all professional services victims, and you'll note that the United States is at number 1 at 58%. And we're going to be seeing a trend as far as the geographical targeting of a lot of these threat actors that the United States is going to be number one, largely just due to the fact that they're aligned and trying to attack those Western affiliate nations. But we'll get into more of that a little later. Secondly, we have banking and finance. So this sector saw a 41% increase in attacks from H1 to H2, making it the second most targeted industry. This rapid escalation does highlight this financial sector's vulnerability to evolving cyber threats. And within this alone, phishing had dominated as the primary attack vector. With it being the most effective attack method, they had to focus on those high click-through rates on those malicious links. Additionally, ransomware groups like Medusa, Fog, and AKO, they're going to be using sophisticated and social engineering tactics to deceive financial employees as well as customers to gain the unauthorized access. For common attack tools, a lot of these threat actors frequently deploy Mimikatz for that credential dumping, AnyDesk, which is a legitimate tool, but it's a remote access tool, as well as ngrok to establish secure tunneling for covert access in those compromised networks. For common initial access TTPs, the most common entry points include phishing, tainted shared content, user execution, and the abuse of valid domain accounts. So attackers were able to exploit these weaknesses to gain initial foothold and execute further malicious actions. For the top vulnerabilities for banking and finance, we have CVE 3519, which is a critical Citrix NetScaler vulnerability, which would allow code injection and full system compromise. Secondly, we have CVE 2022-3236, which is a severe Sophos firewall flaw, which would enable remote code execution, which would allow attackers to bypass the security controls. This chart on the right shows you the banking and finance monthly targeting, with October at the highest with 25%. Next, we have manufacturing. So cyber attacks on the manufacturing sector did increase by 58% in the second half of 2024. This is largely driven to seasonal production pressures, interconnected systems, and the supply chain vulnerabilities. So these threat actors are going to be exploiting these dependencies to maximize disruption as well as those ransom demands. From a geographical focus and targeted regions, a lot of geopolitical tensions do play a significant role within manufacturing-related cyber attacks. A lot of these threat actors are going to be targeting intellectual property as well as those critical production systems. So from what we saw, the United States was the highest at 51%, which will remain the primary target, followed by Canada at 6.41%, Germany at 3%, Italy at 2%, and Brazil at 1.79%. For common attack tools that are used, the most attackers commonly did deploy Mimikatz for credential dumping, AnyDesk for the remote access tool, and ngrok for secure tunneling. For common initial access tactics, the threat actors did gain access through phishing, tainted shared content, user execution, and the exploitation of valid domain accounts. So these methods did provide initial entry points for further lateral movement within the manufacturing networks. For top vulnerabilities, we have CVE 2017-11882, which is a Microsoft Office memory corruption vulnerability, which would allow remote code execution without user interaction. Additionally, we have CVE 2024-37085, which is a VMware authentication bypass flaw, which would enable unauthorized access to virtualized environments. Again, this map on the right shows you the geographical locations of those manufacturing victims. You'll note that, again, as I said earlier, the United States is number one, but it does just show the other array of countries within the manufacturing industry that are being targeted. Now turning to retail. So July and November within retail saw the highest number of cyber attacks, and this does align with historical data, identifying the second half of the year as the most volatile for the retail sector. A lot of the threat actors are going to be taking advantage of those increased digital transactions, high-end e-commerce activity, as well as seasonal hiring surges that can introduce security gaps. From an attack focus, a lot of these threat actors are going to be focusing on point-of-sale systems, so they want to compromise payment data on transactions, cloud platforms, so they can exploit those misconfigurations and those security gaps in those retail e-commerce environments. And finally, supply chains. So by targeting those vendors and logistics providers, they can disrupt operations and gain lateral access into those larger networks. For common attack tools, we have Mimikatz, which is the credential dumping tool, Cobalt Strike, which is a legitimate tool, but it can be used for nefarious purposes, which is a pen test tool. A lot of these actors are going to deploy malware and gain persistent access through the Cobalt Strike. For common TTPs for initial access, we have phishing attacks, exploiting public-facing applications, so attackers can target web applications and those e-commerce platforms for vulnerabilities. And finally, using valid domain accounts, so credential compromise would allow attackers to move laterally across those networks. For the top vulnerabilities exploited, we have CVE 2024-37085, which is a flaw in the VMware ESXi, which lets attackers bypass authentication and access the system without those proper credentials. Secondly, we have CVE 2020-1472, which is a critical vulnerability in the Windows Net Logon, which allows attackers to gain full control of a domain controller without a password. The chart on the right shows you the monthly retail targeting, with July and November, as we said, being the highest. Our assessment for why that is the case, at least for July, is that it's the summer. We have 4th of July, people are traveling, kids are on vacation, and there's going to be a lot more money being spent as well as those summer jobs. And then for November, people are going to be getting into the holiday season. You have Thanksgiving, you have Christmas. So there's going to be a lot more activity within the retail sector where threat actors are going to try and capitalize on that increased activity. And finally, for technology and software. So the technology sector does include telecommunications, software and IT, and managed security providers. And we saw a 12.36% increase in attacks compared to H1. So technology firms store and manage vast amounts of sensitive data. They do remain a high value target for these threat actors. From the geographical focus, the United States was at 44.5%, which remained the most target country. However, we saw India as the second runner-up with 6.5%. And this is largely due to the fact that it's becoming an emerging tech hub. It's an emerging economy, which with all that emergence, it's going to create more access vectors and threat vectors for those threat actors to action on. For common attack tools that are used, the threat actors frequently leverage PS-exec for their remote execution, as well as NetScan for that network monitoring. And then for common initial access TTPs, spear phishing links do remain the primary initial access vector, which would allow attackers to deceive employees and infiltrate those networks. For the top vulnerabilities, we have CVE 2020-1472, which is that Microsoft Net Logon privilege escalation vulnerability, which would allow attackers to compromise domain controllers and gain that full access, as well as CVE 2023-46604, which is a critical Apache active MQ vulnerability, which would enable remote code execution through those use serialization attacks. This chart on the right shows you an H1 to H2 comparison of threat actors targeting technology. We note that Lockbit for H1 was the highest accounted for as far as threat actors targeting this industry. However, for H2, we noticed that Ransom Hub has surpassed them with targeting this industry. All right, so now we're on to our first poll. So which of the following best describes the industry your organization operates in?
Give it a second here since I see people are still submitting their answers. And then I will share the results.
All right, so what do we got here? Professional services, we have 22, manufacturing at 17%, banking and finance at 26, 0 in retail, technology and software at 13%, and other at 22. All right. Thank you for your answers in that. Cool. So now we're going to turn into threat actors. So these were the top 5 threat actors that we saw in the second half of 2024. We have Ransom Hub at number 1, Akira at number 2, Play at number 3, Kill Security number 4, also known as KillSec, and Meow at number 5. So before we dive into Ransom Hub, I do want to make a note that for our H1 report, we identified that Ransom Hub was our runner-up or more of an emerging threat actor in the first half of 2024. So they went from their runner-up number 5 all the way to our number 1 threat actor. And I think this is important to highlight because it shows us how quick these groups can emerge, they can adapt, and how quick they can create effects across the cyber landscape. So with that, who are they? They are Russian-based ransomware as a service group. They have a strong presence within the cybercrime ecosystem, and they primarily target high-value sectors. So from what we saw, we have professional services at 13.84%, engineering and construction at 13.5%, manufacturing at 11.49%. And really what this is they're aiming to maximize the financial gain over those compromised organizations. And while those were the highest industries that we saw, it's important to note that Ransom Hub is targeting almost every other industry as well. So even we can see at the very bottom, religious organizations were at 0.52. That doesn't mean they're immune to it. They're still trying to get access into them, showing that really they're just their focus is not just those high value industries as well. So for the geographical focus, they have a strong presence in targeting the United States, which we saw at 49%, which does make it a key target region for them. Secondary targets do include the United Kingdom, India, and Canada, all at 3%, which also indicates a global expansion into those financially lucrative markets. Ransom Hub did have high-profile breaches in the second half of 2024. So in August of 2024, they did claim responsibility for the Halliburton attack. It was a confirmed breach. They also claimed the attack on MetLife in the later part of 2024. That was denied by the company, but they did claim responsibility for it. So this does highlight this challenge of trying to verify ransomware claims and exactly who had done it. From an operational focus and on data exfiltration and extortion tactics, they're going to be using Telegram to leak that information and amplify those ransomware demands, as well as collaborating with other threat actors to increase the impact of attacks. They're continuing to evolve their technical and strategic approaches as well, and they're going to be doing this by refining its ransomware payloads and attack methodologies to improve that efficiency, as well as increasing a focus on critical infrastructure from major corporations. So watching organizations be concerned. So their ability to target critical infrastructure in the high value sectors with those sophisticated extortion tactics do pose serious risks to operational continuity and that reputational trust. This chart on the left shows you their monthly Ransom Hub activity. And while initially you might see it and go, well, there aren't many months that seem very standoutish, I think what's important to note that that's not the case, right? They're continuously targeting, they're continuously active, and that they don't have a preference of what month it is. And it just highlights, again, just how busy they are and how adaptive they are in terms of becoming the #1 threat actor, at least from what we saw. Now for Akira. So the Akira ransomware group had significantly expanded operations in the second half of 2024. They actually surpassed their total 2023 attack volume within just a few months in the second half of 2024. So with this increased ops tempo and this growing technical sophistication, they really have established themselves as one of the most aggressive ransomware threats today. So with those targeted sectors, they're going to be focusing on industries that are essential to infrastructure and business continuity, including manufacturing, which what we saw at 21%, professional services at 18%, and engineering and construction at 10%. And while those aren't the only ones, or excuse me, only industries that they are targeting, this chart on the left shows you not only the monthly Akira activity, but also the industries that they're targeted between those months. So we saw from August to October, they weren't necessarily very busy, but it seemed like they made up for it in November, December, which is aligning with the holidays. From the geographical focus, Akira's attacks are concentrated within the United States, which is at 69%, with a secondary targeting in Canada at 7%, and a growing expansion in Brazil at 5%, Germany at 3%, and Italy at 2%. So this does suggest there is an increase in global footprint as well as a strategic focus on those regions with higher ransom paying potential. Akira is also escalating their extortion tactics. So in November 2024, they actually had the largest single-day data disclosure where they published data from over 30 victims on its leak site. So this tactic was designed to maximize pressure on the victims by forcing them to comply with the ransomware demands, while also demonstrating just their operational strength within this ransomware ecosystem. Akira also employs adaptive targeting strategies, so combining aggressive data disclosure with those advanced technical evolution. They have designed and utilized a dual payload approach, which includes a original ransomware variant, which it encrypts and locks the system, as well as a Rust-based Megazord payload, which enhances evasion techniques and that adaptability to bypass security defenses. So why should organizations be concerned? So their rapid expansion of dual payload ransomware capabilities make it a highly destructive and stealthy threat, right? This increases the likelihood of these undetectable attacks, which could lead to significant financial losses and operational disruptions, and as well as reputational damage. So for Play, in July of 2024, Play Ransomware introduced a Linux variant targeting ESXi environments, expanding its reach into the virtualized enterprise systems. So this shift does allow Play to disrupt multiple virtual machines at once, which can maximize damage and ransom leverage. So as organizations are relying on virtualization, Play is adapting to that to exploit those critical systems more effectively. This chart shows Play's movement across industries through H2 of 2024. So we can see that they did, in fact, prioritize manufacturing industrial products. Well, conversely, we have technology towards the bottom. But like I said earlier, just because it's at the bottom, just because it's a very low percentage, does not mean that Play is not interested in getting after those industries as well. So no one is immune, especially when it comes to Play, as far as these industries are concerned. Play was also collaborating with North Korean state-sponsored actors. So between May and September of 2024, they partnered with Jumpy Pisces, which is a North Korean APT group. This collaboration does blend cyber criminal operations with nation-state tactics, making them even more dangerous, right? So by aligning with these state actors, they're going to gain access to more advanced techniques and that broader operational reach. They're also targeting high-profile organizations with those disruptive attacks. So in December of 2024, there was an attack against Krispy Kreme, which disrupted operations all across the United States. So by targeting companies with these complex supply chains, plays trying to ensure that these victims face immediate pressure to pay the ransom than face prolonged outages and the inability to have business continuity. They're also evolving to a more sophisticated ransomware actor, so they're continuing to advance by integrating technical improvements, state-backed collaborations, and refined attack methods. These groups adapt quickly to security defenses, ensuring that continued success. Ultimately, its growing technical capabilities and partnerships do suggest larger, more impactful attacks in the near future. So why should organizations be concerned? Well, the collaboration with these state-sponsored actors raises the complexity and severity of a lot of these attacks. So now organizations not only have to worry about cyber criminals, they have to worry about cyber criminals with the backing of advanced persistent threats, which is very, very significant. Now for Kill Security, also known as KillSec. So they had emerged as a major ransomware threat. They climbed from number 62 at the start of 2024 all the way to number 4 in the second half of 2024. So again, this rapid rise does highlight just this growing influence and operational success in the cybercrime ecosystem. Their transitioning to a ransomware as a service model did fuel their expansion. So by doing so, by transitioning to this model, they attracted numerous affiliates. They also have a competitive commission structure and increased accessibility to fuel its attack volume, making it one of the fastest growing ransomware groups. So they also prefer data exfiltration and extortion over traditional encryption. So what they're going to be doing is by leaking stolen data on the darknet, this group's going to pressure victims into paying, making encryption really unnecessary in a lot of these cases. For the targeted sectors, KillSec is going to focus on industries with this high-value data and financial leverage. Its primary targets do include financial services, professional services, and technology at 13% each, while consumer and retail were 11% and healthcare was at 9%. This chart on the left shows you just the actual swath or array of industries that they were targeting. So again, while those were the top targeted industries, we have automotive at the bottom at 0.9%. That doesn't mean they're still not trying to get in there and enact effects against that industry. From the geographical focus, United States at 32% remain KillSec's primary target due to the economic significance. However, the group is also expanding into India, where that growing financial tech hub and all those markets present this lucrative attack opportunities. KillSec is going to be leveraging Telegram and Tor networks for resilience and recruitment when it comes to sophisticated communication promotion strategies. They're going to aggressively promote its ransomware as a service program to expand that reach. They do have unconfirmed ties to other ransomware organizations, potentially increasing its operational strength. That is definitely in the realm of possibility, as we're seeing with other threat actors. They're trying to collaborate, trying to mitigate those weaknesses and leverage those strengths with each other. So why should organizations be concerned? So KillSec, the ransomware as a service model and this global expansion do make it a top-tier ransomware threat with an increase in attack frequency. And finally, Meow. So Meow ransomware did pivot from encryption to pure extortion. In March of 2023, there was a free decryptor that really rendered Meow's encryption-based ransomware ineffective. So as a result of this, the group shifted its focus from data exfiltration and extortion, completely abandoning the traditional encryption-based attacks. So with this pivot, they're now targeting large organizations with those valuable data sets to include professional services, which what we saw at 22%, manufacturing at 11%, engineering and construction at 10%, banking and finance at 10%, and technology and software at 8%. So by targeting data-rich organizations, this group is going to maximize leverage over its victims. From the geographical focus perspective, they're primarily going to be targeting Western nations. So with the United States, we had at 52% being that primary focus. Other key targets do include the United Kingdom at 7%, Italy at 5%, Israel at 4%, and Australia at 3%. So this really just does reflect this preference for regions with a higher ransom paying capability. Ultimately, Meow does want to aim, or is aiming to maintain a low public profile to evade detection. So unlike traditional ransomware groups where they want to advertise what they're doing and how they can do it, their pure extortion tactics generate fewer network artifacts, making detection more difficult. So with these attacks, they're becoming less visible, but that does not mean that they're being any less effective or as far as a decline in attack frequency. They also have potential ties to the Conti ransomware group. So this group, if you're unfamiliar, they're a Eastern European or Russian affiliated group. And they have a lot of code similarities and shared tactics that do suggest that they have ties to this group, but attribution does remain unconfirmed. These links do reinforce that technical sophistication and the operational maturity within Meow as this group is concerned. So why should organizations be concerned? So this transition to a pure extortion tactic, or these extortion tactics, prioritize data theft and public leaks, which could create serious risks for customer trust, regulatory compliance, and that reputational damage. This chart on the left shows the monthly Meow activity. August was the highest at 32%, where we have the lowest November at 8.57%. So before we pivot to the next section, I do want to make note that for any defensive or mitigation strategies for these threat actors, I do encourage you to follow up with our publication of our H2 report. So we now have a poll question. So are you concerned about one of these threat actors impacting your organization?
Just a few more seconds here. Thank you everyone for submitting your answers. They're great. All right. Okay, I still see some movement. One more second. Cool. Sharing the results.
All right. So we have Ransom Hub at the front with 43%. We have Akira at 24%, Play at 10, KillSec or Kill Security at 19%, and Meow at 5%. Awesome, good stuff. Okay, so now let's get into our timeline and our TTP trends. So as far as peak activity periods are concerned, so from October to December, 61% of all high and critical instances were mitigated, which did highlight a sharp increase in attack activity towards the year end. This surge does align with the increased activity during the holiday season, making organizations more vulnerable to the cyber attacks. For the most active attack days, 60.32% of all high and critical incidences occurred during the midweek, with Tuesdays and Fridays emerging as the most active attack days. What's important to note is actually in the H1, Tuesdays were the highest risk day as well, which does suggest a recurring pattern. And so with the assessments of this is that they're Tuesday, it's called Patch Tuesday. They're going to be implementing a lot of these fixes or patches with unknown vulnerabilities, which could be exploited by threat actors. For the peak attack hours, attackers focus their operations with a narrow window, with a peak activity recorded between 1400 and 1700 UTC. Chart on the left shows you just a more holistic view of the 24-hour span and averages of the high and critical alerts by hour in UTC. Now for the MITRE tactics. So in the second half of 2024, initial access remained the most exploited tactic, accounting for 49.34% of all high and critical incidences. However, for the first time in 2024, valid accounts at 52% surpassed phishing at 39% as the most prevalent initial access technique. So in contrast from that, right? At the first half of the year, we ranked phishing as the number one attack vector, as the valid accounts number 3. So this does highlight an important evolution in threat actor strategies. So they're going to be increasingly exploiting existing accounts rather than relying solely on those deceptive email campaigns. Password spraying and brute force attacks became the most two commonly used procedures for compromising valid credentials, which allowed those adversaries to evade detection and persist within those networks. All right, we have next poll. Which tactic has been a primary concern for you or your organization?
Okay, sharing the results.
All right, so we have an initial access, phishing and valid accounts at 61%, execution or command and scripting interpreter user execution 6%, defensive evasion, obfuscated files or information, impaired defenses 17, credential access or credential double keylogging at 11, and then lateral movement or remote services internal phishing at 6%. All right. So now let's get into our trending cybersecurity concerns. So these were concerns that the team identified that were likely going to be seen in 2025 and beyond from what we saw in 2024. So right out of the gates, AI phishing and code execution. So think of this as far as AI is concerned, two sides of the same coin. So not only can AI help a lot of organizations, it can also help a lot of these threat actors. So what are some of the key concerns we have for 2025? So phishing attacks have become very hyper-personalized in terms of those AI-driven phishing campaigns. A lot of these threat actors are going to be leveraging AI to analyze target social media activity and messaging patterns. Additionally, large language models and natural language processing will enable phishing messages that are nearly indistinguishable from human communication, which significantly increases their success rate. This image on the top left shows you a phishing email made by USPS I put it in here because I actually got hit with that during the holiday season. I ordered a bunch of packages, and like however they found, they knew that I was ordering a lot of these packages, and they could throw this at me, and hopefully they could get me to fill out the information and get access from there. We also have AI-driven code execution. So a lot of threat actors, they're going to be using AI to automate zero-day exploitations, and they're going to be developing polymorphic malware that continuously evolves to evade detection. With that, open source AI tools are lowering that entry barrier, which allows even less sophisticated attackers to deploy advanced threats with that minimal effort. So some of the evolving tactics we anticipate to see in 2025 is that real-time personalization within social engineering. So they're going to analyze public and private data sources in real time. They're going to craft phishing messages tailored to an individual's habits, their interests, as well as their communication style. And ultimately, this personal level of personalization is going to make traditional phishing detection measures far less effective. And on the topic of polymorphic malware evasion, so AI-driven malware is going to dynamically modify its code to avoid detection, which is going to bypass traditional signature-based defenses. So really, security teams should adopt behavior-based detection techniques to counter this threat. From our observations we have here, critical start. So our senior SOC engineer, Savannah Overly, did highlight significant industry gaps in addressing AI-driven social engineering tactics, since traditional security awareness training does struggle to keep up. Meanwhile, our senior SOC engineer, Jonathan Pike, did report there was a sharp increase in phishing complexity in the second half of 2024, which does reinforce the need for AI-powered threat detection solutions. The image on the bottom left actually shows you a bit of malware that was done using, at least the code, using static analysis. And if you've ever used ChatGPT to create any sort of programs, you'll know that for every single instance of your code, it's going to create a comment. And while this isn't French, I don't speak French, the indications are there that people are using ChatGPT or just AI in general to create malware and try and use it at a lower level, or at least at a lower experience level for people. Next, we have the nation-state targeting expansion. So APTs, a lot of their goals do align with geopolitical factors, but what we're starting to see now is not only are they going to be intensifying their attacks on critical infrastructure, as like targeting energy grids, healthcare, and financial sectors, there's also a rising focus in those cryptocurrency thefts. So now we're seeing a divergence from the normal geopolitical motivations of these groups, now more of a financial one as well. These state-sponsored actors are also stealing intellectual property in AI, renewable energy, and pharmaceuticals to gain a competitive edge. And we're assessing that we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. China is something that they've done a lot of this against us. One example was the F-35 program. They got into those servers, pulled the information, and while this was a long time ago, we are now starting to see this indigenous fighter plane coming out of China that looks a lot like the F-35. So it isn't going away. In fact, we anticipate it to get a little more, we're see a lot more as the year progresses. So from the global impact perspective, a lot of these attacks on infrastructure are escalating. They're going to be threatening essential services and economic stability. We're also seeing the fact that there's going to be increases in regulations and geopolitical tensions, which are going to fuel state-backed APTs, is going to make threat mitigation even harder in 2025. As far as evolving tactics, the APTs are likely going to be using AI-powered espionage, something we talked about earlier, for automated phishing and those rapid zero-day exploits, as well as using living off-the-land techniques to avoid detection. So that's using legitimate tools within the machine to avoid that detection. We're also seeing an increase in multi-channel attacks. So by targeting supply chains and those interconnected systems, they're going to be amplifying those breaches. One recent attack was that in October 2024, Chinese-linked hackers, also known as Volt Typhoon, exploited a zero-day vulnerability to breach a U.S. telecom provider using AI-generated phishing emails to steal that sensitive data and maintain that long-term access, while also demonstrating the rising threat of those AI-driven cyber attacks. So first, some defensive strategies. So zero trust architecture restricts that lateral movement within those networks, reducing their breach impact. Also, using AI-powered endpoint detection and response could and can enhance real-time threat detection using machine learning in those behavioral analytics. And finally, we have quantum computing. So this is kind of a buzzword, hot topic right now, right? But the threat is definitely there. So with this rise of quantum computing, it does introduce significant risks to sensitive data. This sector is supposed to go from 500 million in 2024 all the way to 3.5 billion by 2030. So this not only will support normal organizations as far as a threat security postures standpoint is concerned, but as well as threat actors as well. So for evolving tactics, one of the most concerning threats we're going to be seeing is that steal now and decrypt later approach. So a lot of attackers are going to exfiltrate encrypted data today, hoping that a lot of this quantum computing can be more accessible in the future. And then once that is, they can decrypt it, allowing them to action it from there. There's also algorithms like Shor's algorithm, which poses a direct threat to RSA and ECC encryption, since they can break these exponentially faster than classical computers. I believe it was in order to break those, it would take one computer, a normal computer, 10 septillion years. However, with a chip such as this Google chip you see in the image here, you can take it about 5 minutes. So it's definitely becoming a real thing. It's definitely something that we could definitely see for the future. So what are the impacts of this? So this extends beyond just encryption failures. Data security is going to be fundamentally compromised, which could expose the sensitive information that was previously considered safe, right? This obsolescence of cryptography is going to force organizations to overhaul their security infrastructure, which could lead to significant regulatory pressure as governments and industries race to establish a lot of these new standards. The economic fallout from this could be substantial, as businesses could face financial loss, as well as operational disruptions due to the compromised cryptographic systems. So some of the countermeasures to mitigate this, organizations really should be adopting quantum-based resilient cryptographic algorithms such as Crystal's Kyber, which is a quantum-safe encryption method, as well as Crystal's Dilithium, which is a digital signature system that uses complex lattice math. Both of these have been recognized as a viable post-quantum encryption standards, and it's also important to note that it's important to have, I guess, collaboration between organizations, industries, and governments. That's one of the best ways to standardize a lot of these security practices and ensure that not only your organization, but organizations at large are safe for that. All right, now we're down to our last poll. So would you like to receive a copy of our cyber intelligence report?
Yay, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, just make sure you submit the poll so we have a record and we will send it to you after the event. Cool. Okay, I think I can end this poll. Oh, okay, just 3 more seconds. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. We'll end the poll. And Alex, I think we're at time for questions.
Yeah.
Awesome. Are you able to see the questions on your end, or do you want me to read them out to you?
I can get it.
Okay, awesome.
All right, let's see. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss any questions. I'm not seeing any. If you can afford quantum computing, then you can afford to hack me. Correct. Definitely don't disagree with that. Is one industry more at risk than the other? Interesting. I would say, kind of like we were saying earlier, I think it just depends on the timeline as well. So in the second half, we noted that retail, for example, was one of the higher ones. A lot of these threat actors are going to try and action sort of time of the year. They're going to be actioning sort of certain industries that have sort of impetuses or triggers that could make the threat landscape a little muddier for them. So I would say that if I had to make an assessment right now, I would still say manufacturing, due to the fact that we are now having a larger push for having manufacturing in the United States and push that a little more. So as the infancy and as that is growing, I think there's going to be a lot of threat actors trying to action that.
Alex, we do have a few questions in the Q&A box. I don't know if you're able to see that on your end.
Look at that. I can. All right.
Awesome.
Let's see. Do you see the increase in technology due to attacks trying to gain access into companies that are that are supported by those service providers? Let's see. I can definitely see that. I think that with the increase in technology, if you get to the source of a lot of those support structures, at least as far as the security standards are concerned, I think I'm thinking as a threat actor, right, and kind of putting my hat on for my old job, you want to get ahead of that, and you want to, if you get into those service providers, you're basically cutting off the head of the snake as far as being able to getting into other industries or companies that are being supported by those providers. So Steve had asked that we are being told what countries or regions are the most attacked. Is there information available to know areas or countries where the attacks are coming from? This way we can lock down and be more secure in these areas. So a lot of the threat actors that I've seen both here as well as perhaps an old job is that a lot of it's, like I say, Eastern aligned, right? So a lot of these threat groups, they have almost charters to say, hey, these are the people you can target. These are the people you cannot target. Organizations you can, organizations you can't. So when we have a lot of these organizations coming out saying, hey, you can only target Western nations, from my assessment on that, thinks or shows that these guys are going to be coming from either Eastern European, Russian affiliated, Chinese affiliated, Iranian, basically the main bad guys that the United States deems to be so. As far as where we can find them and all that information, I don't have a specific tool off the top of my head. I would just keep trying to stay informed as far as a lot of these threat actors, where they're coming from, and just do your research as far as if you have a specific threat actor that's targeting your organization, just try and do as much research as you can as far as where they're coming from and how you can mitigate that. How do these sectors change from 2024, and how do you predict these sectors for 2026? So how do they change from 2024? So kind of like I said a little earlier, from the first to the second half, with the holidays being a primary access vector for a lot of these threat actors, they're going to be trying to action that increased visitation as far as web traffic is concerned to a lot of those e-commerce websites, as well as the seasonal hiring, where people aren't really just going to be caring about their security posture. And a lot of people are going to be accessing and attacking that as well. And how do I predict these sectors for 2026? I would give my best assessment that manufacturing is still going to be that number one. Like I said earlier, we're trying to pivot a lot of our manufacturing away from Asia, from Africa, going into the United States. So I think that as we get more and more embedded in the manufacturing arena for the United States, it's going to open up more attack vectors for those threat actors. So manufacturing, to me, is assessing is going to be the number one industry being targeted. As a security and compliance manager in a manufacturing organization, what strategic approach should be taken to effectively mitigate and respond to these attacks? What strategic approach? That's a really good question. I would really say, as far as the strategic approach is concerned, and I'm putting it on my hat on as far as, you know, being with military intel officer, right? Is a lot of it is just education. A lot of it is just really trying to understand where these attacks are coming from, specifically with your organization regarding manufacturing, taking a lot of this data that we have, trying to learn from it, trying to get ahead of it and make those determinations as far as trends, tactics, those TTPs, and how you can basically get ahead of those. All right, I only see 4 questions right now, but make sure not to miss any others.
Do we have any more questions? We still have a couple more minutes, so I will pause here for a second. All right, I think there are no more questions. Okay, well then, with that, I hope you all, walk away from this webinar with valuable insights, and a huge, huge thank you to Alex and his entire team for putting this report together. So with that, I will conclude today's webinar. Once again, I'd like to extend my thank you to our speaker and all of you for attending. Thank you for being so active in the chat. We definitely appreciate that. And I hope to see you at one of our future virtual events. Thank you and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.